I bit off more than I could chew for this project. I made a chessboard using a combination of woodworking, molding, and resin pouring. It was a nightmare of a process, and I made a lot of mistakes along the way. Hopefully you enjoy the process more than I did. Here we have it, the board that we're going to turn into a chessboard. So I've measured 2 inches from every edge, and so we have a nice square in the middle here. And we're going to use that as a guideline to inset the middle, so that we have a place to put each of the squares on the chessboard that I will print out of resin. And I've never used a router before, and I'm not the best at woodworking, haven't had much practice. So I'm going to watch some tutorials real quick to make sure I don't royally screw this up. Try not to judge my woodworking too harshly, and definitely don't use this as a tutorial because I don't know what I'm doing. There are definitely easier ways to get an inset square like this in a piece of wood. It would be one thing if it was a solid piece of wood, but it's already spliced together like separate pieces of wood, so this doesn't really have the same effect that I would have liked, but it's what I ended up deciding to do anyway. If there was any advice I could share from the first time I used a router, it would be to measure at least twice before starting, which I guess is just good advice in general. And that clamps and a shop vac for dust collection are super helpful. With most of the wood routed out, I decided to use some woodworking chisels to remove the last few bits that I couldn't route from a stable position. This bit was really satisfying and felt more like sculpting than woodworking, but I guess now that I think about it, those aren't mutually exclusive. Next, I really wanted to square up the edges of the inset. I'd recommend using something besides a dull box cutter to mark your lines, but it's what I had on hand, so it's what I ended up going with. I don't have any footage of me sanding out this middle section, but for any of those people out there who love a sanding montage, don't you worry. There will be plenty of that later in the video when the resin pours go south. Here, I'm cleaning off the board with some mineral spirits in preparation for staining, but later on in the process I end up sanding off the vast majority of the stain that isn't trapped under resin because I don't like how it looks, so we're not going to linger on this too long. So here it is, the mold. Made a little box for it. Put some parchment paper on the bottom because it still doesn't quite lay flat. And we're gonna do some silicone. Get a nice little mold of this guy. Gonna have to clean him off a little bit first. Here's the mold. There are some bubbles in it. We'll see if those have issues inside the vacuum chamber. The bubbles did, in fact, have issues inside the vacuum chamber. This mold ends up being a failure. Right now I'm mixing some resin to pour into the mold. Even though the mold fails, this process of weighing and mixing is the way I end up creating the successful tiles later on. After noticing the failure, I set up another mold box. As you can see, the bubbles in the first mold popped and created nodules all over the tile. Legos work pretty well for creating borders for a silicone pour. That said, you'll still need to seal any large openings with hot glue. Even then, some silicone managed to sneak between the bricks, so in my next box, I covered the interior with tape and paper to prevent the waste.
Okay, we're running it back because the mold that I ended up getting, this is the first failed mold over here. This hole in my hand is from sanding this guy. And then the successful mold pumped out this guy, which is nice and all. But I need 2 molds, and the mold that pumped out this guy was kind of uneven, a little bit rough on the back, and I want to try to get a little bit more of a clean mold. So we're going to do a double mold here. I used some E6000 because nothing else was sticking to this printed resin. So now it's actually stuck in place. I had an issue with the successful mold where it moved way over to the edge, and it was almost really bad. But this way, I should have a nice 2-part silicone mold so that I can, crank them out a little bit faster. I had to cut down this wood so that this whole thing would fit inside the vacuum chamber. But yeah, so now I'm just going to clean these guys up and then pour silicone over them, and yeah, should be set. And there we go. With it all vacuumed out and multiple times over, it should be good to set. Okay, we did it. We got a double mold. And I mean, this just shows you how far off I was. So we got my first mold ever, right there. Look at that, 110. Okay. Now we got the double mold. I've learned some things. 115. This bad boy is thick. It's time for us to pour. This part takes a while, so let's speed it up a bit. Now that we're back to real time, you can see that the resin is boiling and the bubbles aren't sticking around like they were earlier. Based on all my pours, this is what the resin looks like when all the air bubbles are removed that would have been visible to the naked eye. Now all I needed to do was repeat this process 31 more times. I had a few bad ink mixes and resin spills, so I guess it ended up being more like 40 more times, but what can you do? I attempted to flatten out and clean up every single tile in the hopes that this would prevent bubbles from forming beneath the tiles, but it turns out that this didn't actually help at all. But it did take a long time. With all the cleanup out of the way and the tiles in place, it's time for the real nightmare to begin. Definitely filled it too full, but that's just how it's going to be. What was I thinking? Okay. Welcome back to this disaster. So there are patches right now along the edges, and I think it's because I let the resin cure too long while it was in the gas chamber. So now we need to do another pour. We're gonna try it without putting it in the vacuum chamber, and we're gonna try to sand it down with a pretty high grit sandpaper. Apparently I didn't mix it properly, so there are spots that are just still a little bit tacky, but clearly it was not uniformly mixed. But as you can see, this ripply texture doesn't really have any bubbles in it, unless the bubbles are underneath still, which is really annoying that they're there. But you know what this means? This ripply surface with some imperfections and some tacky spots. It's time to sand again. I'm so tired of this project. Well, I went in for another round and I didn't quite get it right. So as you can see, it is not even at all. What is the play here but to sand it back down and go the frick again. I nearly scrapped this project several times, but it's finally finished. Sadly, the details on the chest tiles were lost in the resin pour. If I were to do it again, I would use more ink when pouring each mold to make the tiles a little more opaque. There are still imperfections and bubbles trapped in the resin, but they aren't as noticeable as I expected. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a good one.